Have you ever heard anybody talk about old world versus new world wines? Do you have a clue what they're talking about? That's what we're going to look at in this video, the difference between old world and new world wines. The distinction between old world wines and new world wines are commonly misunderstood. Many people use the term broadly, saying that they prefer old world to new world wines without really truly knowing the difference between the styles or what makes a wine old world versus new world. That's what we're going to do. We're going to take the mystery out of all of this. In this video, we're going to look at 4 key differences that will simplify this whole old world versus new world thing. The key differences are, number 1, what do you mean by old world and new world? We can also call this location. Number 2, rules for making wine. Some people call this the regulatory differences. Number 3, names and labels on bottles. And number 4, you're really going to want to know this, the taste difference. Plus, there'll be a great bonus at the end of this video, and I'll tell you how this will all have an impact on you. Keep in mind, at any time, if you like what you hear, click like, subscribe, and hit the little bell so you'll be notified when there's a new post. Are you ready? Here we go. Number 1, location. Old world wines refer to those made in countries considered the birthplace of wine. This includes the Middle East, the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley, which is known as the Fertile Crescent, and then also Europe. The Fertile Crescent is Syria, Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Israel, and Georgia. But the reality is, most of the time we think in terms of just Europe. Primarily France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Germany, and actually to a lesser degree, Austria, Greece, Switzerland, Hungary, Romania, and maybe even Croatia. On the other hand, New World wines refer to wines made in the colonies, plus. Now that would be the US, South America, including Argentina, Chile, and Brazil, plus Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. Oh yeah, and plus China. Actually, anywhere else not considered Old World or Europe. Number 2 is the rules for making wine, or the regulatory differences. Old world wine producers have been making wine for thousands of years. Accordingly, they're tied to quite a bit of tradition. In virtually all these countries, there are strict government regulations of what type of grapes may be grown, how wine can be made, how much wine they may produce at any one time, and thousands of more laws, literally thousands of laws, rules, and regulations. Actually, one of the craziest and one of my favorite wine laws is in France's region of Châteauneuf-du-Pape. There, so as not to disturb the vines, grapes, or the tranquility of growing some of the best grapes in the entire world, UFOs are not permitted to land. Seriously? No, seriously. In the New World, the US, South America, Australia, there are enormous differences. There are virtually no regulations or government guidelines telling winemakers the types of grapes they may grow, where they can grow, the density per acre or per hectare, techniques used in making the wine, including the use of oak barrels or the lack of use of oak barrels. You grow as much or as little as you want, whenever and wherever you want. Winemakers and producers can be as creative as they want to be. The focus of attention for winemakers is twofold. How can you allow the wine to speak the absolute best way it can? And number 2, what does the consumer want? It's basically the difference between stringent laws, rules, regulations, and restrictions to ensure historic consistency versus the Wild West show. How are you doing there? Is this information helpful? If it is, write taste in the comments below. Now, here is a Rioja. This tells you it's from Rioja region of Spain and is made from the Tempranillo grape. Here's a Chianti. Actually, it's a Chianti Classico. And this tells you it's made from the Sangiovese grape. Now, here's something else that I think is really cool. You see this little red rooster? That tells you this wine has met all the governmental regulations and is not just from the region of Chianti, but the small village of Chianti. When I see this red rooster, I know it's a good Chianti. Now, this could be a bit confusing for new wine drinkers in the US, but for those from the old world or have been drinking wine for a while, this is all relatively simple. People from Europe have been drinking wine for 1,000 to 2,000 years, even longer. Knowing their wine by the people and place is all second nature to them. In the New World, wines are named after the varietal of grape grown and produced, the grape actually inside the bottle. So you have a Cabernet Sauvignon. This tells you it's a Cabernet Sauvignon. Now actually, in the US, even though it says Cabernet or Chardonnay or anything else on the label, it only has to be 76% of that particular grape. Now, here's a Chardonnay. And here's a Pinot Gris. Being able to read the name on the label is easier for the new wine consumers in the US. You know, we say, I like Chardonnay, or I like Cabernet, or Pinot Noir, but we're beginning to understand how important place and people are. I hear more people saying things like, I like my cabs from Paso Robles more than cabs from Napa or Sonoma. Now, Paso is in California, south of Napa and Sonoma. Its wines are a lot fruitier than the cabs from Napa or Sonoma. Or, you know, you might also have people say, I like New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs more than California or French Sauvignon Blancs. You know, even though it's easier to know the grape, as we're getting more astute at tasting the differences in place, we are migrating towards wines that fit our palates much better. Number 4, style of winemaking, or the taste difference. Generally speaking, old world wines are more subtle in color, aroma, and flavor. They're not as bold or expressive. They have more earthy flavors and minerality to them. They're lighter bodied, more restrained, have more complex flavors, are lower in alcohol. Also, there's not as much oak in old world wines. They're a lot more gentle. Many prefer old world wines because of the flavor, history, and heritage. To them, there's something romantic about holding a glass of wine that's been made the same way for centuries. Generally, New World wines are bolder, more intense, have more fruit flavors, higher in alcohol, and are fuller bodied. Its taste is less complex. For new wine drinkers, it's easier to pick up on the primary fruits, and because of its fruit-forward nature, new wine drinkers have a tendency to migrate towards new wines a whole lot quicker. New World producers have not been making wine as long. There's not the history in making wine, much less great world-class wines. However, they've come a long way, an incredibly long way. To summarize the taste difference, it's sort of like the concept of dating. Old world wines are like courting. Everything's slow and easy. Over time, you get to know one another. Eventually, you take them home to family, to mama. New World wine is like speed dating. Everything is up front. There's the introduction, hopefully great chemistry, then my place or yours. Well, there you have it. Everything you need to know about Old World versus New World wines. The first time I tasted a Châteauneuf-du-Pape was in 1974. It was a vintage 68. The producer was B&G. You know, there are some people and some wines that embody the real plus the ideal. Sort of earthy with spiritual roots that stand up and even thrive under adversity. For me, that's the standard to strive for. Now, as a quick side note, the wine Châteauneuf-du-Pape is affectionately known as just Châteauneuf, or CDP. There are 2, even 3 underlying reasons why I absolutely love Châteauneuf. First, you have those earthy, layered aromas on the nose. It's unique and rich, but then there's that first sip. When it touches your lips and moves onto your palate, you'll experience its evolving, layered taste. It embodies all the good characteristics of a well-balanced, world-class red wine. It's sophisticated, yet down-to-earth and extremely versatile. Hold on just a second. That's good. I mean, really good. We don't have enough time to get into the details about the bottle, but Châteauneuf's bottles are unique. They have the family crest, or the crest of the chateau, or vineyard built into the bottle. Plus, Châteauneuf-du-Pape parallels life like no other wine. It's a champion. Actually, Châteauneuf-du-Pape is a wine, a region, and a little village on the Rhone River in the south of France. You know, with its narrow, windy cobblestone streets, outdoor cafes, restaurants, bakeries, ancient ruins, and a 360-degree view of over 250 different vineyards, it's definitely worth a visit. You know, its name comes from the time when the papacy moved from Rome to Avignon, France in 1309. There were 8 different popes who served in Avignon until 1378. The village sprang up and was where the Pope had his summer residence, or chateau. The first Pope was Pope Clement V. He was an avid wine lover. Between Clement's love for wine and the need for sacramental communion wine, vineyards were planted. You know, life doesn't get much better than that. Living in a castle, giving communion, and drinking some really great wine. God, what a life. Actually, he was such a great guy and so revered that the village and region took its name from the Pope. When translated, Châteauneuf-du-Pape means the new house of the Pope, or the Pope's new castle. Did I say it's a really good wine? That is an understatement. Châteauneuf-du-Pape is world-renowned. At least one of the producers from this region will receive recognition for making one of the top 10 wines in the entire world each and every year. One of the other things that I love about this wine is how it parallels life. It lives in the middle of the real, but gives us a glimpse of the ideal. Let me show you what I mean. Let's look at the soil, water, and wind. There are 3 basic types of soil in Châteauneuf: galets roulés, sand, and limestone. Galets roulés means literally rolled pebbles. In my view, there's nothing pebble about this thing. These rocks were created and deposited thousands of years ago as glaciers carried and crushed them through France. The Rhone River smoothed them into what they are today. Many of them are the size of a human fist. These rocks appear to be the absolute worst soil anything can grow in. They absorb the sun's heat during the day, and by mid-afternoon they're so hot you can barely walk in the vineyard. The galets create another problem. They establish a barrier above the soil and water table that makes it extremely difficult for the vines to get the precious water and nutrition needed to exist. The region gets an average of 27 inches of rain per year, and that's not a lot, especially compared to, say, 38 inches in Chicago or 46 inches in the Willamette Valley in Oregon. Now, in the summer, when there is rain, The water evaporates once it hits the hot rocks. This eliminates the vine's ability to take in precious, vital nutrition from the rainwater. Another factor that will blow you away is the mistral winds. These are northeast winds that rage through southern France. During certain times of the year, these northeast winds are funneled through the Rhone River Valley for days, weeks, and even months at a time. You can feel the difference as you're standing in the mid-afternoon sun. The wind starts easy and intensifies. Before you know it, they're whipping south through Châteauneuf, past Avignon, across Languedoc, and over the Mediterranean coast. By the time the winds reach Châteauneuf, you can experience 45 to 50 mile an hour sustained winds, with winds easily reaching 115 miles per hour. Yeah, as a point of reference, hurricane force winds are 79 miles per hour. At 115 miles an hour, that makes these winds equivalent to a Category 3 hurricane. Having grown up in Miami, it's easy for me to say they're incredibly destructive. These winds transition from refreshing to unnerving to massively destructive within hours. In the early spring, the mistrals wreak havoc as they destroy the tender new shoots on the grapevines. Later in the spring, it destroys as much as 30% of the vine's flowers, the precursors to the young grapes. If you think bad soil, little or no water, and devastating winds are bad, in 1866, like the vast majority of Europe, all the vineyards in Châteauneuf were almost completely destroyed by the phylloxera disease. You know, dejected and depressed, growers lost their livelihood, gave up, left the area, and abandoned their vineyards. It took decades for the region to rebound. The vineyards were not rapidly replanted at the time because it cost too much both in money and time. 70 years later, in 1936, growers began to get their feet back on the ground. 70 years. You know, our pandemic hasn't lasted 2% of that time. Dormant for 70 years. Can you even imagine how you would feel if this season of coronavirus lasted 70 years? Now, in an attempt to save what they had left of the grapes, incredibly strict guidelines were established to give the grapes a fighting chance. You know, when you stop to think about it, you begin to wonder, how can the grapes in Châteauneuf even exist, much less produce some of the best wines in the entire world? This is where I absolutely love the story of Châteauneuf. The people, the grapes, and the wine. This is where the lives of grapes and people parallels. Here's where I find grapes and people are so much alike. This is where Châteauneuf, this is where we can become a champion. Like so much in life, destructive forces can bring both good and bad. So here's the beauty of this rocky soil. The sun scorches the galets during the day. The sun rays are absorbed. During the cool French nights, the galets slowly release the heat up to the underside of the vines and grapes. We find this horrible soil, the rocks, and the process of heat transfer aid in the development and ripening of the fruit like no place else in the world. Also, because the galets don't allow the rainwater to get to the vines, that causes the roots of the vines to struggle. The roots then end up going deep in search of life-giving water and nutrition. You know, isn't the natural world incredible? The hurricane-strength winds, while they bring destruction, also helps moderate the intense temperature and dehumidify the climate. This stops or at least reduces the development of fungi, mildew, and other diseases. There were also those strict guidelines that were established to help protect the vines and the grapes. The vines have to be pruned so that they remain much lower to the ground than other vines. This is to protect the vines from the continuous, fierce force of the winds that tear their way through the vineyards. and through the region. The Mistrals create an atmosphere unlike anywhere else in the world. It enables very unique grapes to grow here better than anywhere else. The rigid guidelines only allows 9 red grapes to be grown in Châteauneuf. Grapes with intense fruit and flavor. Those strict guidelines gave and to this day give the vines and grapes a fighting chance, not just to live, but to excel. You know, that's sort of like America historically. Back in the day, schools didn't have fences around them. It was found in studies that kids would play close to the school buildings in large part for safety. It was seen that once fences were put up, the kids would play all the way out to the edge of the fence line. Now, even though it was much further away from the school building, the kids would venture out. These studies showed that fences, guidelines, provided safety, security, and confidence. You know, the Good Book provides us with 10 main guidelines. They're not there to restrict life, but to grant us health, latitude, freedom, ideal relationships, safety, and security. Some people see guidelines as restrictive, others see them as freeing. Guidelines in Châteauneuf not only give the grapes and the vines a fighting chance, they enable them to thrive. Thrive like no place else in the entire world. So is Châteauneuf-du-Pape good? Well, I'm sort of partial. After all, it is my favorite wine. Châteauneuf is one of the most versatile wines in the market. You can serve it with everything from grilled beef, veal, pork, game, duck, sausage and lamb, to stews and braised dishes, casseroles and seafood. You can also it pairs well with different Asian dishes. You know, going back to the life parallel, all the factors that go into making your life and mine, both good and bad, when blended together, are critical, unique, and instrumental in creating the most phenomenal people in the world, you and me. Isn't it interesting how you can fall in love with someone, someplace, or something, and as time goes on, you begin to see the idiosyncrasies, the good and the bad, that makes them who they are, and before you know it, you begin to appreciate them more. Like Châteauneuf, grow and flourish where you're planted. Make the best of life. Play the hand you're dealt, and do it with finesse, great friends, fabulous foods, and wonderful wine. Well, there you have it. Châteauneuf-du-Pape in life. Listen, if you ever have a moment, I'd love to visit and share a glass with you. Feel free to send me a direct message on social media or even shoot me an email. I'd love to know your world-renowned story, the good and the bad. Hey Posse, thanks so much for investing the time to watch this video. I trust it was helpful to you. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. And please consider hitting subscribe. Also, click here to check out our new online shop. We have a great lineup of wine-related items that will help you get the most out of your wine experience. Oh, and be sure to check out these other videos. Until next time, cheers.